This panel follows, I think, very nicely on the discussions that we have had this morning so far, and in particular, the important points that were raised by the Estonian defense minister about not only building one's own security, but continuing to support Ukraine to the maximum in order to obtain justice, restore territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence. And so on this scene setter, let's build and talk about how Ukraine's security is so integral to NATO's security, and how support to Ukraine is a core element of Europe's security architecture. So NATO, together with Ukraine, is building political interoperability, military interoperability, and industrial interoperability. And at the same time, we are helping Ukraine fight tonight. The Estonian defense minister mentioned a couple of the initiatives, and we'll explore them a bit in this conversation. But already around 80% of military assistance to Ukraine is coordinated and delivered through NATO. The prioritized Ukraine requirements list, the perhaps known PEARL, ensures the delivery of critical US-sourced equipment for Ukraine, including 75% of all Patriot interceptor missiles. And as the war continues, the balance between urgency and sustainability becomes more complex and more important. Short-term military needs must be met without undermining long-term institutional development, interoperability, and defense reform. So NATO is now operating on two timelines at once, just like Ukraine is: the urgency of the war and the demands of long-term security. And so in this panel, let me first introduce our distinguished members and panelists. So starting with Lesya Ohryzko, lovely to have you here. She's the head of the Reform Support Office in the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, and she's the founder and director of the Sahaidachnyi Security Center. Patrick, yes. Patrick Turner, the senior NATO representative in Ukraine, and Brigadier General Jason Guiney, and I'm going to try to make sure I get all the elements of your titles, and I have to read it, so bear with me. Forward Liaison Officer, Element Chief of the NATO Support Assistance and Training in Ukraine in NSATU. It's a good thing nobody holds me accountable if I miss a word or two. But that can be, NATO does love an acronym, don't we? So let me begin by posing first a question to Patrick. Could you reflect on how NATO is balancing Ukraine's urgent battlefield needs with long-term support?
So, very good afternoon. It's a great privilege to be here. This is a great forum. So, occasionally you might be surprised to hear we talk to NATO headquarters, so I had at least a little bit of warning of this question, so a little bit of time to think about it, and it's obviously a question that matters. So I wanted to say three quick things right at the beginning. First, as Tanya has actually already said far better than I'm going to say, our relationship with Ukraine, NATO's relationship with Ukraine, is both about supporting this great country in what we call the fight tonight, but also ensuring longer-term sustainable defense and deterrence capabilities, both for Ukraine and for Europe. Secondly, it is a uniquely close political and military relationship which reflects the scale and sophistication of Ukraine's military capabilities, so the largest armed forces in Europe, and how fundamental Ukraine is to European and transatlantic security. And we often say Ukraine's at the heart of European security. Well, that is true, and we all need to think about all of the implications of that being true. NATO, in its history, has never had such a substantial, important and deep partnership. And if anything, I would contend that the word partnership is much too small a word to describe the relationship. And third point, more and more, the relationship between NATO and Ukraine, Ukraine and NATO, is really a relationship of equals. And as others have said here earlier, allies understand and are starting to understand even better how vital it is to learn from Ukraine as well as to support Ukraine. So those 3 points mean that Ukraine is directly related to all of NATO's top 3 priorities. So these were the top 3 priorities at the Hague summit, the NATO Hague summit last summer, and they're going to be the same top 3 priorities for the NATO Ankara summit this summer. So those 3 priorities: first, much higher defense spending, and there's been some seriously good progress on that, but much further to go. Second, much higher defense industrial production, and the gap between where we are and where we need to be is large. And third, large-scale sustained support to Ukraine. So all of those 3 are both urgent priorities, but also long-term priorities. None of those 3 are going to be going away anytime soon, and progress on all 3 will be reviewed and next steps decided at the summit in Ankara. And across the piece, some good progress, but much further to go. So on the last of the 3, and the one that we're most concerned with this afternoon, this year, support to Ukraine. This year, Ukraine has asked for $60 billion in support from partners. So far, almost 2/3 of that has been pledged by allies. Last year, for the record, NATO allies provided about $45 billion in military support, so $60 billion is a larger sum. NATO Security Assistance and Training for Ukraine Command, so Jay will talk about that, plays a key role in delivering that support. As a critical part of this support, allies will continue to support the Pearl initiative, which Tanya mentioned, which was launched last summer by President Trump and the NATO Secretary General, under which key US equipment is provided to Ukraine. That initiative, I underline, continues to provide a vital support. It's done it over the last month, since July, and it's continuing to do it, and it will continue to do it. We have to make sure that the support provided by allies this year reflects the urgent priorities agreed between Ukraine and NATO, and in particular that means air defense, increased production of drones and missiles, and long-range munitions. Many other priorities, but those are the 3 main ones. And we need to ensure that the support is timely and predictable, and that needs work. Our support, as well as being for the fight tonight, must also help Ukraine build sustainable capabilities for the future, and those capabilities need to reflect a long-term plan and vision for the future, as well as immediate needs. As part of the longer-term approach, we have an agreed interoperability roadmap agreed between NATO and Ukraine. That sets out detailed short and longer-term targets for Ukraine's defense and security capabilities and processes, and those targets are similar to the kind of targets we set for allies. And we're working with Ukraine on a range of reforms. Very last point, it's very clear that large-scale support will be needed in the longer term, whether or not there's a ceasefire or a peace agreement. The Russian threat will not go away. So as I said, ensuring effective and sustainable support to Ukraine will be a key issue at the summit in July and for years to come. We have to deliver that support. NATO and Ukraine belong together. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Let's turn to Jason. How does NSATU, the famous NATO command, ensure that training and equipment that are delivered to Ukraine under wartime conditions also support at the same time long-term needs and remain relevant and aligned with NATO standards for long-term planning?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So NSATU was stood up in 2024, and it acts as NATO's overarching body to coordinate the provision of war-winning equipment and training from the alliance and other strategic partners to keep Ukraine not only in the fight, but as well postured for the future. And keeping Ukraine in the fight is NSATU's #1 priority. And first I'll talk a little bit about logistics, because that's one of the strengths of the alliance, is that we are able to harness the logistics of 32 allied members as well as other strategic partners. And essentially what we're able to do is we can take a UDCG commitment and actually turn that into a battlefield delivery, something that's tangible. And we do this through what I would call a smart contribution process, by which we work with the AFU and other entities to determine priorities, needs, and then NSATU goes out across the globe to source contributors and mechanisms such as the prioritized and critical Ukraine requirements list, the Czech ammunition initiative, comprehensive assistance package, NSATU trust fund, etc. And since 2024, NSATU has coordinated the delivery of hundreds of millions of rounds from pistol to Patriot via this reach-back mechanism. And so what this enables Ukraine to do is, in the fight now, it enables Ukraine to strike deep into Russia, which is getting increasingly better at. We're seeing a lot more hits on their defense industrial base, protect the front, or hold the front line, protect the skies, the grain corridors, but equally important, protect the most innovative defense industrial base on the planet here in Ukraine. The advantage actually for the alliance with this is it also gives us insight to our own munitions and equipment that are currently in the fight, and it's given us a fantastic feedback loop and has led to improvements in our own equipment. And but it's important, as Mr. Turner articulated, is that we can't look at contributions as an end state. Sustainability and predictability are key to keep Ukraine in the fight now and in a post-war scenario. So we cannot leave Ukraine guessing on what is coming next. They're going to need that to plan offensive operations and take back land. And you'll notice I specifically use the word contribution and not donation, because we shouldn't be thinking of this as a charitable donation, but rather a real investment in not just Ukrainian security, not just European security, but global security, because this is a war with global implications. I'll just briefly touch on training, because General Syrski says that victory starts with training. And since 2024, NSATU with the EU military assistance mission has trained hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers, and not to the NATO standard. So it's not that we're training them in the NATO way of war. We're using NATO doctrine and training as a baseline, but that is done with Ukrainians to make sure that what is being delivered is standardized across Ukraine, but is injected with the realities on the battlefield. So looking to the future, as Mr. Turner said, if Ukraine is the heart of European security for decades to come, then I would say that the NATO interoperability roadmap is that center of gravity. And what the NATO interoperability roadmap is, again, it's not about NATO standards, but it's about the ability to work together all the way from the Ministry of Defense to industry, right down to the platoon level on the battlefield. And if we think of interoperability, we look at like Australia, South Korea, Japan. They are not NATO members, but we are fully interoperable with them. And I think that's a great model for NATO. And if we look to Finland and Sweden, they were able to quickly onboard to NATO because of interoperability. And I would say that Ukraine has been well down the path and down an accelerated path to this. And so the NATO interoperability roadmap sets both Ukraine and NATO up for future success, regardless of membership status. I'll just conclude by saying is that the heart of any security guarantee is a strong and resilient Ukrainian military. And the foundation of that strength and resilience is going to be on sustainable and predictable material and training support to Ukraine. So just as Ukraine hasn't given up their fight, the onus is on us as NATO alliance and partner nations to be equally determined and committed in our resolve to support NATO. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And what really strikes me as critical is not just the support and the contribution that NATO makes, but actually how closely NATO and Ukraine are working in that process, and how well integrated and really symbiotic NATO and Ukraine are in both planning for the immediate needs, but also for the long-term needs. And Patrick, you made a point about how actually it's a two-way street, and it's not just a partnership, but it's actually an integral relationship where NATO and Ukraine depend on each other. So building off of that, Lesya, maybe I could ask you, what now, from a Ukrainian point of view, do you think NATO should take away from Ukrainian lessons learned, from the Ukrainian experience? What should NATO integrate into its planning, into its long-term thinking about security?
Thank you, Tanya. And I think this is indeed a very crucial question for both, for NATO and for Ukraine, because indeed, as you rightly mentioned, and my colleagues, that it shifts the paradigm from a one-way street to a two-way street here. And I think all these years, and I think it stands true for both the Ukrainian European integration and the Euro-Atlantic integration, where the paradigm was that there is this Western model, this is the right model. Ukrainians are often doing things differently. Ukrainians have to improve. And this is sort of the one-way street. Now, on the 12th year of war, and specifically the 5th year of the full-scale invasion, we in Ukraine have increasingly this conversation among our public intellectuals, but also in our European integration circles, Euro-Atlantic integration circles, this question on, wait a second, perhaps with our policy of leaning back on asymmetry, on our agility, on rather horizontal networks than rigid procedures and rather vertical structures, that made us actually stand here and have this conversation here in Kyiv and not somewhere in Warsaw, maybe this stands to the fact that Ukrainian model is not a dysfunction of the Western one that just needs certain improvement, but it actually can be a standalone model that has its right to exist. And I very much like the concept that has been coined by a friend of mine and one of the key experts on NATO, I would say, in Ukraine, Oksana Otsacha. She's actually in the room here. And she disputes a little bit the concept of interoperability, and she coins another one talking about inter-improvability. And I very much like this idea, because it actually is about the fact that it's a two-way street, and there are certain modes how we operate, and it's about appreciating each other's positive sides and about learning from each other. Now, on the question about more down to earth on the lessons learned that can be taken by NATO. Of course, there are very many. I would perhaps point to three in the interest of time. And number one, from my perspective, is that mass still matters. And I think this is a paradigm that has been predominant for more than 1 or even 2 decades in NATO, that the strategic bet is on very expensive, very exquisite platforms that will guarantee us the technological edge, and basically this is our entry ticket to winning any wars. Now, while this is true and is an indispensable part of modern warfare, I think Russia's invasion on Ukraine has shown very explicitly that you still need, especially during a war of attrition, you still need all the millions rounds of ammunition. You still need the millions of drone interceptors. You need those drones. You need the spare parts and essentially then the industry that can produce those spare parts. And most importantly, you need the people, the troops, the trained personnel. And I think this is also a very important lesson to our European partners and NATO partners, that perhaps the time of boutique European armies should come to an end, and we are talking about mass. So that's number one. And just to say that I think the absolutely brilliant spiderweb operation conducted by the Ukrainian Special Forces and everything that we are observing now in the Gulf states and the Ukrainian drone operators' engagement there speak very much to this lesson learned about mass that still matters. Number two, from my perspective, is about tempo. It's about time. I think Mr. Darwin said it all right, that those that can adapt quicker have bigger chances of survival than even those that start at stronger positions. So it's not necessarily just the strength right now, but it's the adaptability. And this is essentially what everybody I speak to from our Western partners from the defense sector is in awe with, because everybody talks about this speed of adaptation, the speed of innovation, those couple of weeks, which is essentially the feedback loop from the Ukrainian trenches to the labs, adjusting the software, the hardware, and there it goes again back to the Ukrainian fields and the Ukrainian trenches. The speed of procurement, the ingenuity of thinking about decentralized procurement, which is still a bit of a phenomenon that is not sometimes not well perceived or not understood in our NATO partners and colleagues. So all of that is essentially about you need to have this sense of urgency and to adapt. And from all of the lessons learned that we might be talking about today during this panel and overall during the conference, I think this is the one where NATO, unfortunately, is the least advanced now. There is understanding that there is this gap, but how do you actually adopt it and how do you absorb these lessons? And I would finalize by saying, by talking a little bit about the third one, the third lesson learned, and that is about the whole of society response. I don't want to use the R word, resilience, because please don't talk about resilience to Ukrainians anymore. It's this whole of society response, which is not a support function. And I find this very often in our conversations where this is sort of regarded as a sideline. Now, if you're living close to a crazy neighbor for who IHL are empty words and empty concepts, you need to understand that wars are not fought just on the battlefield in the trenches. Unfortunately, wars are fought against your energy system, against your system of evacuation, against your agriculture, against your telecommunications, against local self-governance. You name it, essentially. And it is this absolutely unique Ukrainian model of civil-military cooperation that I think NATO should very well look at and integrate. Having said that, of course, we understand that what worked for Ukraine will not necessarily be the 100% recipe for Germany or for Lithuania or for Spain. But there is a lot to take here. And I would just stop by saying the only worry that I have when we are discussing lessons learned and what can be learned from NATO is that the danger, I think, is not about getting these lessons or understanding them, but it's or absorbing them. It's about the absorption capacity of NATO, of how seeing these practices you're quick enough to integrate, because I couldn't agree more with the previous speaker, with the Minister of Defense of Estonia. We don't have the time. it can be very quick, that those challenges that we are facing in Ukraine will be those challenges that will be faced by other European countries.
I took a quick cue from our leadership here to make sure we were still okay for time. I wanted to see if there's a question in the audience in case, oh, that was very quick. I think that is Elena. Elena, is that you? Do you want to ask a quick question? I didn't give you a microphone, but it's coming to you.
Thank you very much. Olena Davlikanova, Friedrich Ebert Foundation, Sahaidachnyi Security Center, and also Center for European Policy Analysis. I am very grateful for very detailed description of successes in cooperation of Ukraine and NATO in the framework of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. However, I would like to ask all of you to think in a wider frame of the overall global madness. We see how we see the impact of the war in the Middle East on what is going on right now. We know that there are rumors that on the other side of the Atlantic there is an idea to create an alternative alliance with only capable European states and so on and so forth. So there are so many other bigger threats. And given all that, in your opinion, what are the priorities that Ukraine should seek from NATO in this wider framework? And vice versa, what are the priorities that NATO should seek from Ukraine given these overall circumstances? Thank you.
Thanks very much. Would anybody like to go for... Since it's a question about priorities, I think we can do 1 minute per answer. Patrick.
So I think we have, as I set out, we have some agreed priorities with Ukraine. They are the same priorities as they were a couple of months ago, and doubtless they'll be the same priorities in several months' time. So especially air defense, more drones and missiles, and long-range artillery munitions. So the priorities are there. The challenge is, one, ensuring that we're actually going to have enough money to deliver on those priorities, and then the industrial production, to the extent that this is our business, to deliver on those capabilities, the predictability. Ukrainian industry has done an extraordinary job. I saw a figure in the last few days, 50 billion of industrial production capacity here, up from 1 billion 5 years ago. So, and then just on the wider picture, I said the evidence is that the Pearl Initiative providing US weapons, it's continuing now. I said I'm predicting it will continue, and NATO is here to stay. We've been through many times, and those with good memories will remember many times, and I'm utterly confident that NATO and the Transatlantic Alliance and the marriage between Europe and America is here to stay.
Thank you. Jason.
Yeah, thanks. And sorry, I'd be remiss if I didn't let you know, I thought your speech was brilliant. I wrote down inter-improvability. I think that's a brilliant term. Thank you very much. A fantastic question. And what I would say about what's going on in the Middle East and other parts of the world and what's going on now and what could go on in the future is I'll come back to Jomini's 10 principles of war. And the first and most important principle is selection and maintenance of the aim. So from a NATO perspective, from an NSATU perspective, our priority is keeping Ukraine in the fight, first and foremost. And second is setting up for long-term success. And that leads me to another one of his principles of war is unity of effort. And I think NSATU and NATO as a whole is unwavering in that endeavor, and we will not let the enemy dictate our operational tempo and set our priorities. We will establish and enable those priorities, and I think so. I think to me, it's very clear what NATO and NSATU's priorities are towards Ukraine.
Thanks very much. And I think, Oksana, now would be the time to file that patent for a trademark of NATO-Ukraine improvability. Let's go to Lesya.
I very much agree. I would perhaps not talk about, the operational priorities that we've been discussing, and Mr. Turner actually talked about this already, maybe more on a broader perspective. And I would rather talk about the priorities from the Ukraine perspective of what we would be wanting to see from NATO a little bit more explicitly. And I would say it's two things. One is a more definite Russia strategy. And I think we in Ukraine are somehow hostage to the very unfortunate situation where there is not a clear-cut understanding. So what's the strategy? So what type of Russia do we picture in the future, and how do we picture our relations with that Russia, or with anything that would come after certain internal developments in it? And this strategic objective of NSATU also, but this is not just about NSATU, but pretty much everybody in Europe talking about, keeping the Ukrainians in the fight. That does not seem to us as a strategy, because this is essentially about Ukrainians bleeding out and buying more time for others to rearm. This is great, we are doing this, but this is not a Russia strategy. And unless there is one, there will be always this attempt to, let's just support them in their continuous fight. So that's number one. And number two, and I would again go back to the statement of the Minister of Defense of Estonia, talking about this punching, Russia's punches in the face. We in Ukraine call it the Gopnik logic. Gopnik is sort of like a thug. They operate only like this. If you punch back, then they understand. And this is what we, from a Ukrainian perspective, would want to see more explicitly from our Western partners. You see such an enormous amount of sub-threshold warfare operations, which can be, and by many scholars, has been already coined as the beginning of Russia's war against all other European countries. And unfortunately, in the vast majorities, the strategy is putting your head in the sand. By responding, by punching back, this is the real deterrence, and by supporting the Ukrainian absolutely fantastic and brilliant operations by our special forces, by our intelligence, etc., in the asymmetric moves that we can, that we are getting better with every single month.
Thanks very much, Lesya. I just want, because we are, thank you, we are unfortunately out of time, but I just want to make one point in closing to bring together some of the themes that we've discussed. And I want to pick up on a point, Lesya, that you've made about resilience, and the fact that resilience is not an inexhaustible resource. Resilience is not an eternal fountain that continues to provide this incredible ability to withstand such a tough fight. Resilience must be nurtured, it must be fostered, it must be sustained, it must be fed. And resilience is fed by helping Ukraine fight tonight, and it's fed by building a long-term future security for Ukraine and for Europe together. Slava Ukraini!